Okay. So your test is tomorrow. On the study guide, I put I can statements just because these are the things that you should be able to do. The first thing we did was we learned how to write a fraction as a decimal. And it says to remember that 1/5 is the same as if you put the top number 1 on the inside of the little house and the bottom number 5 on the outside. You can see in this example, I went ahead and added the decimal and the 0 after it. If you add a 0, just make sure you always add that decimal before it. So for number 1, how would I set it up? Because that's half the issue. Aiden?
2 divided by 3.
So which one would go on the inside?
2.
2 would go on the inside, 3 would go on the outside. On your quizzes, honestly, if you set it up in like half the time, if you got it wrong, it was simply because you set it up incorrectly. So 3 does not go into 2. So what do I need to add, Aiden?
Add a decimal and a 0.
Decimal and a 0. 3 does go into 20. How many times? Chipper?
6 times.
6 times. 3 times 20 is 18. Subtract, I get another 2. Now what? You can tell that it's going to be repeating because if I add another 0 and bring it down, it just makes 20 like I had before. So my decimal is going to go straight up, so it's going to be 0.6. But how can I decide if it's going to be repeating or not? Or how can I show that it's going to be repeating? Elizabeth? I put a line over the 6. And yes, on your test, you will lose partial points if that line is not there and it is supposed to be there. So just make sure if it's repeating, there's a line. If it's not repeating, don't worry about it. On number 2, how would I set it up? What would I do? Elizabeth? 7 on the inside, 9 on the outside. Since 9 doesn't go into 7, what can I add, Piper? Decimal and a 0. 9 does go into 70, but how many times?
7.
7 times. 9 times 7 is 63. When I subtract, I have 7 left over. What's my next move, Lily Hammers? What do I do next? I can bring the decimal straight up. Then what? Raylan? It's going to be repeating again because if I add my 0, and you can add your 0, there's nothing wrong with adding a 0 to bring it down. You can do that as many times as you need to tell that it's going to be repeating. But you can already see because this is 70 again, and then there's going to be another 7 and 63 and so on. So it's going to be repeating. Mishka, how do I show that it's repeating? You put a line over it. Now you all can put 0.6 and 0.7. It's not going to change the answer. Or you can just put 0.6 and 0.7. Technically, the right way to write the number is 0.6, but I'll take either one. The next section is I can add and subtract integers with the same and different signs. What are the rules for adding and subtracting integers? If you add them, what are the rules? Aiden?
If you're adding with the same sign, you'll add. If you're different, you'll subtract.
So in addition and subtraction, the same sign, you add the numbers together, but they're different signs, you subtract the numbers. If you have a subtraction problem, what are the things you have to do? You can't leave a subtraction problem like it is. Tate, what do you have to do to subtraction? Subtraction, you're going to do keep, change, change. So you need to know those rules for addition and subtraction. Now, number 5, it is addition, so I don't have to do anything. I don't have to change anything. But are they same signs or different signs, Owen?
Same.
They're the same, so do I add or subtract? You add. 5 plus 2 is 7. What is my sign going to be, positive or negative, Audrey? Negative, because they're both the same. So when they're the same, you keep the sign. Number 6, are they the same or different, Holly? They're different, so I'm going to subtract. 12 minus 3 is 9. Is it going to be positive or negative, Seawin? It's going to stay positive because the 12 is larger. On number 7, you have subtraction, so you have to do keep, change, change. How would I rewrite it? Kaden, when I rewrite it, what would it look like?
It would be plus negative.
It would be what?
It would be -4 plus -23.
So that's my rewritten one after you do keep, change, change. These are the same sign, so I'm going to add them together. It would be -27. Number 8, if I rewrote it, because it's subtraction, so I have to do keep, change, change. If I rewrote it, what would the rewritten problem be, Mason Kessler?
25 plus -42.
Good. These are different signs, so I'm going to subtract. What is 42 minus 25, Ava? What would 42 minus 25 be?
17.
You can just do it off to the side if you need to, but don't forget that you have to regroup. So, and then it would be -17, since the -42 is the larger one. So how do we feel about changing fractions to decimals and adding and subtracting? Are we good here? Okay. The next section was just multiplying and dividing integers. So we still had, these rules were even easier than addition and subtraction because they were the same rule. So what were the 2 rules that you had to remember for multiplying and dividing? Chipper?
Keep, change, change.
Nope, that was subtraction. What was it for multiplying and dividing, Raylan?
Same sign, positive, different signs, negative.
Okay, so you had to know that if you multiply and divide like always, you don't rewrite anything, don't change anything. But when you get your answer, if the problem had the same sign, then it would be a positive answer. If they had different signs, it would be negative. So 4 times 7 is what, Aubrey? It would be 28, and then, like you said, negative because they're different signs. What's 63 divided by 7, Riley? 9. Would it be positive or negative, though? It would stay positive because even though these are both negative, they're still the same sign, which means they stay positive. Okay, so these are all the different rules that we've learned. After we learned them all with integers, though, that's when we got into the rational numbers and we had to remind ourselves how to deal with fractions and decimals. So how do you all feel with integers, with the whole numbers? Are we good with that? Any questions? Okay, well, let's look at the decimals and fractions. So I can add and subtract with decimals and fractions. Remember, when you add and subtract decimals, what's the one thing you have to remember to do? Chipper?
Line up the decimal points.
So line up decimals for to add and subtract. Okay, so when I line up 4.7 and then -2.36, the same rules that I did up here apply to it. So if they're the same, I add the numbers. If they're different, I subtract the numbers. So I have a positive and a negative. Am I going to add or subtract these numbers? I'm going to subtract because they're different. Now, when you subtract, after I lined them up, I can see there's this empty space right here and I don't have a number. Mishka, what would I put in this empty space? I would put a 0. And now just make sure that you regroup. So you borrow from the 7, make this a 10, and so we would end up with 2.34 because our answer or our decimal came straight down into the answer. Now, is it going to be positive or negative though? Why?
Because 4 is bigger than 2.
Yep, it's going to be positive because, well, you don't actually need the positive sign. I just wasn't thinking. But yeah, it's going to be positive because the 4 is larger. Now for number 12, this is a subtraction of decimals. So we still have to do keep, change, change. So when I do keep, change, change, how would I rewrite the problem? What would it be rewritten? Adam, what would it be?
Negative 3.75 plus positive 5.62.
Good. So I rewrote my problem. Now I can look, is it the same sign or different sign? And what am I going to do? Take negative 3.75 plus 5.62. Are they the same or different? They're different, so am I going to add or subtract? Subtract. Remember, when you subtract, you have to put the bigger number on top. So 5.62 minus 3.75. You need to regroup. So borrow from the 6, make that a 12. 12 minus 5 is 7. 5, can't do 5 minus 7. Make it a 15. 15 minus 7 is 8. 4 minus 3 is 1. And my decimal is going to come straight down. Is my answer going to be positive or negative, Seawin? It's going to be positive because the 5 is larger. So, like I said, decimals are pretty straightforward. You just make sure you line them up, and then you just add and subtract like any other numbers. Fractions is where it gets a little tricky. And on your quiz, this is probably where the majority of you all messed up. Is because what do you have to have on fractions? See when? You have to have where you make common denominators. So on number 13, I have a 3 and an 8. Those are not common. How can I make them common though? There's no way to make 3 into 8. So what would I do?
You go to the least common multiple.
You would make the least common multiple, which is what?
24.
24. Another way you can do that if you don't know what the least common multiple is, but it gets you the same answer, is you can just multiply the two numbers together. So 3 times 8 and 8 times 3. And so 3 times 8 gives me 24. And then 1 times 8 gives me 8. Whereas 8 times 3 also gives me 24. And 3 times 3 gives me 9. Make sure if you do it this way that you bring down your negative signs wherever you have them so you can still look to see if you're supposed to add or subtract. We have a positive 8 and a negative 9. So am I going to add or subtract, Jazz? I'm going to subtract the two numbers, and 9 minus 8 is 1. You keep the bottom number. Is it going to be positive or negative though, Evan? It's going to be negative because the 9 is larger. That's it. So fractions, you all, like I said, if you messed up on your quiz, this was most likely where it was. The one that had the common denominators, you all did great on, but the one where you had to create them is where it got a little sticky. Number 14, same thing. You have to make common denominators. So I need the smaller one to go up to the bigger one. How can I make 4 into 12? Mason Cardwell? Mason?
Yeah.
How do I make 4 into 12? How can I go from 4 to 12?
Times it by 3.
Times it by 3. So remember what you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So I'm going to keep my negative 7/12. And 4 times 3 is 12. 1 times 3 is 3. Before I decide if I add or subtract, what do I need to do to this problem? This is also what got some of you all. I'm not quite done, Caden. You gotta do keep, change because it's subtraction. So if I do keep, change, what would this be rewritten as, KJ? No, it wouldn't be a decimal. You're doing the same thing we did up here with keep, change. So I'm keeping the negative 7/12. And what happens to the rest? It changes to addition. And then what happens to the 3/12? The 3/12 is positive now. So what happens when I rewrite it? It becomes negative. So now I have a negative and a negative. Now I can finally decide if I'm going to add or subtract them. Owen, what am I going to do? I'm going to add them because they're the same sign. This gives me negative 10/12. Can I simplify that? What would I simplify it to? I would divide each by 2 because they're even numbers, and it would go down to negative 5/6. On your test, I'm probably going to give you credit for both of them. I might take off a little bit if you don't simplify it, but you're still going to, it may just be like 1 point taken off. So just make sure that if you can simplify it, that you simplify it and you keep the negative if it's a negative answer. So adding and subtracting decimals and fractions, how do we feel? Good? Okay. Just make sure you have to make common denominators before you try and add or subtract them. One of the last sections is multiply and dividing fractions and decimals. So again, it's the same rules. If they're positive numbers, if they're the same sign, your answer is going to be positive. Different signs, answer is going to be negative. Before we can multiply fractions, when I have a mixed number like this, what do I have to do? Aiden? And how do I do that?
You times the denominator by the whole number, and then you add up the numerator.
Exactly. So 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. That number goes on top, and then you keep the denominator the same. Over here, what would this become? If I multiply the bottom and add the top, what would it become? Aiden? 31/7. Good. So now I just multiply. When I multiply fractions, you just go straight across. So 8 times 31 and 3 times 7. What is 8 times 31? Aiden? 248, you said? And then 3 times 7 we know is 21. Is my answer going to be positive or negative? Mason? It's going to be negative because they're different signs. I can simplify this. Instead of hurting my head to figure out what numbers go into 21 and 248, I would suggest doing long division first and change it back into a mixed number. So when you set up the long division, your top number is going to go on the inside, bottom number is going to go on the outside. 21 does not go into 2, but does 21 go into 24? One time. 21 times 1 is 21, subtract 3. I do have to bring down the 8. I can't just stop there. Does 21 go into 38? How many times? 21 times 1. And when I subtract, it leaves me with this. So this is where I would stop. When you're making a mixed number, you don't keep adding zeros because then that would make it a decimal and everything. So my mixed number is the top number, the remainder, and the outside. So that creates 11 and 17 over 21. We said it was negative. Now, 17 and 21 is easier to deal with. Is there any number that will go into 17 and 21? No. 17, I think, is a prime number. And so nothing will go into it other than itself. And 17 doesn't go into 21 evenly. So that's my final answer. So when you multiply fractions, when you have these big numbers, a lot of times it's easier to make it mixed, and you can deal with the smaller numbers if you need to simplify. Multiplying decimals is the same as just multiplying whole numbers. You stack it up. I like to put the one with the bigger digits on top. Remember, you do not have to line up these decimals. This is not adding and subtracting. You just put the numbers one on top of the other. 7 times 6 is what? Nope, 2 goes on the bottom. 4 goes on top. 14, 15, 16, 18, 35, and 36. Now, after you're done with the 7, add your 0. 4 times 6 is 24. 8, 10, and then 21. Add up your numbers. You end up with 2, 8, 9, 12, 7, 4, and 2. Where does my decimal go, though?
Between the 4 and the 7.
Between the 4 and the 7, because when you look at your numbers, you want to count how many numbers are behind the decimal in the entire problem. So I have 3 numbers behind the decimal, so I'm going to count 3 numbers over, and that's where it goes. Since they're different signs, it's going to be negative. Okay, so are we good with multiplying fractions and decimals? Remember, fractions, you just go straight across. Decimals, the only thing is to remember to put the decimal in the answer. Down here, we have to divide. So dividing fractions, there was, just like subtracting, there was some steps you had to remember. First, we have to get rid of this mixed number. So 15 times 1 is 15, plus 4 is 19. Keep the 15 on top or on the bottom, and bring down everything else. Now we have to divide. So when we divide, what are the 3 things we have to remember? Aubrey? Keep, switch, flip. So when we do keep, switch, flip, this time you're actually flipping the fraction. You're not changing the sign at all. You keep the sign the same, but you actually flip the fraction. So when I do that, what does my new problem look like? Aiden?
8 over 9 times negative 15 over 19.
Good. And now you just do what we did up here with multiplication, and we go straight across. What's 8 times 15? See, Win, what's 8 times 15? 120. And then 9 times 19. What would it be? Owen, what is it? 171. Okay, this one we can't make into a mixed number because, well, there's nothing, it's not improper. So you can only make a mixed number when the fraction's improper. So does any number go into 120 and 171? 3. So if we look at the division, I have the division rules up there at the top in those purple little pennant things. and they tell you how to know if those numbers go in. So for it to be 3, you have to take the sum of the digits and be able to divide by 3. So 1 plus 2 is 3, and that's divisible by 3. 1 plus 7 plus 1 is 9, which is also 9 can divide by 3. So 3 will go into both of these. What's 120 divided by 3? Does anyone know? 40. 12 divided by 3 is 4, and then you just add your 0. 171 divided by 3? If you don't know, you can always set up long division. What would 171 divided by 3 be? It goes into 17 5 times. That's 15. And it goes into 21 7 times. So it'd be 57. Can I make it any smaller? I know 2 doesn't go into it. 40 can't be divided by 3. 57 can't be divided by 4. 5 doesn't go into it. For it to be divisible by 6, it has to be divisible by both 2 and 3, which isn't the case. 8, the last 3 digits have to divide by 8. Don't even have 3 digits, but I know 8 goes into 40, but if I look up there, it doesn't go into 57. 9, I don't think it goes any smaller. Did any of you all see something? So our final answer should be 40 over 57. And then I'm gonna, just because I have a whole lot written here, I'm just gonna go back and look at the problem to decide. There are different signs, so I know my answer is gonna be negative. Sometimes that's the easiest thing to do if you have a whole lot of work and it looks really confusing, just to go back and look at the main problem and see what it was. Now this last one, I threw this on there just in case. I wanted you to make sure you remember you cannot divide a decimal and a fraction. You either have to change them both to fractions or both to decimals. To change it to a decimal, you do what we did up here, where you set up long division and you divide, make a decimal. The only trick with that is if you get a repeating decimal or something that never terminates, that just keeps going, it can make it really hard to divide. So a lot of times it's easier just to make this into a fraction. I know I'm going to have a whole number of 3 and then 6, but what goes under the 6? A 10, because the 6 is in the 10th place. So I have 3 6/10, or negative 3 6/10, divided by 2 1/7. Same thing I did over here. I'm going to multiply and add. What would the first one be as an improper fraction, Raylan? What would the second one be, Aiden? 15 over 7.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, you keep that denominator on the bottom. Bring down the division sign. What are the 3 steps in division, Audrey? Keep, switch, flip. And what would it be if you rewrote it, Alex? If you had this and you rewrote it after keep, switch, flip, what would it be? You keep the 36 over 10, right? My pen's going out. 36 over 10 times, now it becomes 7/15. When you solve it, you multiply. What is 36 times 7? Right, Rylan? 252? Don't know why my pen doesn't like me. Let's try this. That one doesn't like 252. And then 10 times 15, I can just do 1 times 15, add a 0, which is 150. When I simplify it, this is an improper fraction, so I can set up long division. The top number goes inside, bottom number goes outside. 150 goes into 252 one time. And when you subtract, you have 102 left over. What would my new fraction be? Well, or what would my new mixed number be? Mishka, what would it be? I have a 1, a 102, and a 150. So what would it be? How would I take those three numbers and write it? I have a 1, a 102, and a 150. So what would it be?
So 1 over the 150.
The 1 would be the mix, would be the whole number. The 102 would be over 150.
I'm sorry, I can't see it over
It's
here.
okay.
It's really light.
Oh yeah, my pen's going out. I need to hopefully this red one. Can you see this?
I can see that.
Okay, so I just need to use my darker pen. So what will go into 102 and 150? Cyrus, what goes into 102 and 150?
2.
2. They're both even numbers. So 102 divided by 2 would give me 51. And then 150 divided by 2 would give me what? 100 divided by 2 is 50. 50 divided by 2 is 25. So put the 2 together, 75. So 1 and 51 over 75. They're different signs, so it would be negative. So negative 1 and 51 over 75. So this is by far the most work we've done. You have to make sure that you multiply and add, go straight across, do keep, switch, flip. Look on the back side. So these, I just wanted you to be able to, there's nothing new. Everything that, like, if you know the front side, you should be good. But I want you to be able to pull out from the word problems what to do as well. So Whitney rolls a ball down a ramp that's 18 foot long. The ball rolls down 2 feet each second. Which integer represents the amount of time in seconds the ball takes to reach the end of the ramp? So if you imagine it, you have a ramp, you have a ball at the top, and it's going 18 feet, but it goes by 2 seconds for, or it goes 2 feet each second. So how many times would I have to, how many seconds would it take? What would I have to do? Owen?
It would be 36 seconds.
Are you sure? Because if it goes 2 feet a second and it's only going 18 seconds or 18 feet, does it make sense that if it went 36 seconds, that would be like 60 or 70 some feet? So what you did, you multiplied. Each means to multiply, but that answer doesn't make that much sense. Because again, we have our picture. This entire ramp is 18 feet. If I divide these into 2 feet increments, because that's how long each second it goes 2 feet, how many seconds is it going to take to get to 18? So I'm not going to multiply. What would I do instead? What's the opposite of multiplication? Division. So if you multiply and your answer doesn't make sense, then you're going to have to divide. And you can see that we're dividing the ramp into 2 feet sections. So what's 18 divided by 2? So my answer is 9. Okay? Remember, math is a logics game. If it does not make sense, it is probably not right. So after you get an answer, reread the problem and make sure that it makes sense that it would go. If it's only going 18 feet and you go down 2 feet a second, what you could do, you could even draw 2 feet and keep going until you get to 18 and count it up. And that would also be a way to do it. Jason spends $2.35 to buy lunch at school. If he buys lunch on 9 days, what number represents the total change in the amount of money that he has? So how would I figure out how much money he spends? Carson?
You multiply 9 by 2.35.
Exactly. Spends $2.35 a day. 9 times 5 is 40. No, it's not. It's 45. 9 times 3 is 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. 18, 19, 20, 21. I know because money has two decimal places and also because there's 2 numbers. 21.15. Is that my final answer?
No,
No. You know why?
because it's the total number of change amount, and they're taking away his money, so it has so it's negative.
Exactly. It's not asking me for how much money he spends. It's asking me for how much money he has, or what's the change in the amount of money he has. And the money that he has would go down by 21.15. Does that make sense? Okay. So, got your test tomorrow? Remember to study, but also please ask questions if you are unsure about something. Go ahead, get your things together.